People often picture spiritual awakening as this serene, magical moment where you sit in a lotus position, radiating light and loving everyone. But in my experience, it was 7 years of life completely falling apart until I was lying there, literally wanting to die, thinking, great, I'm done. How do I request a refund for this human experience? Only after that complete surrender did the quiet joy finally arrive. When I went through this, the only reliable maps explaining my experience I could find were in ancient sources, like Vedic scriptures, Sufi poetry, Christian mysticism, Kabbalah, alchemy. The single modern exception was probably Carl Jung, who translated this ancient wisdom into analytical psychology long before mainstream clinical practice was ready for it. Right in that state, a year ago, I sat down and wrote a book about 11 stages of awakening. At that time, I had no rational idea why I was even writing it. It just poured out of me. Yet, I didn't feel any urge to publish it right away. Looking back now, I realized that I wrote it for myself, as an anchor to make sense of my own collapse. When you are lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, it makes all the difference in the world to know that you are not going crazy. You are navigating a specific phase, a structured evolution of consciousness. Historically, this wasn't widespread. For thousands of years, the world functioned as a projection of the collective ego, with humanity deeply identified mostly with the body. Those rare individuals who disidentified from the ego were revered or deified, figures like Jesus, Buddha, or the Prophet Muhammad, but they simply realized their inherent divinity, the very same nature that you, I, and every living being on earth embody. But today, a year after finishing the manuscript and everything that has changed since then, including launching this podcast, I realized that it's not just me or separate individuals. The humanity at large is currently living through a massive collective shift in consciousness. More and more people are going through profound inner collapses. But because our modern society lacks a proper framework to support this awakening, since even major world religions often operate through the lens of ego, people facing these states become terrified and lost. They think they are broken. They confuse the painful process where ego surrenders to consciousness with clinical depression, and trying to quote-unquote cure themselves unknowingly prolong their own suffering. When you try to cure an awakening process by forcing yourself to be functional and productive, you are essentially trying to rebuild the very cage consciousness is trying to break out of. You prolong the agony by resisting the surrender. And this is precisely why this book might be so vital right now. And since it is officially dropped on Amazon just a few days ago, I decided to record this episode right now. It isn't a collection of lofty spiritual theories or motivational fluff. It's a diagnostic tool. It maps out the universal 11 stages of the path, bringing together Buddhism, Christian mysticism, Sufism, Kabbalah teachings, knowledge of alchemists, yogis, astrology, tarot, Joseph Campbell, Abraham Maslow, and Carl Jung, of course. It helps you look at your life and say, aha, so I'm not losing my mind, my ego is just relinquishing control at stage 6. It turns abstract existential panic into a clear, recognizable territory. So it makes complete sense to put it out there for anyone facing those same challenges right now. Whether you ever read the book or not, I want today's conversation to help you navigate your own dark nights of the soul, the most misunderstood and terrifying part of the awakening. Because, spoiler alert, the so-called ego death isn't a one-and-done indie movie. It's a multi-season franchise, and just when you think the credits are rolling, the universe drops a surprise sequel you definitely didn't sign up for. So you might as well learn how to handle the plot twist. Now, before we use my own story as a case study for how the ego actually dies, we need to clear up a quick, hilarious paradox for all the spiritual overthinkers out there. If the ego is an illusion and there is no separate I, why am I repeating the word I about 500 times in this podcast? I think I realized I'm telling you. The funny thing is, at one point of my journey, I went full spiritual nerd. I actually tried to stop using the word I in my daily life. I'd go to a coffee shop and instead of saying I'd like a cappuccino, I'd stand there sweating, trying to phrase it like thirst is arising within this organism and cappuccino is requested. It was an absolute disaster. I dropped that idea real fast because trying to speak like a robot does you a massive disservice. You sound completely unhinged to everyone around you. Nobody is thinking at this moment, wow, look at her profound realization of non-duality. They are thinking, okay, who let this weirdo out and why won't she just order her coffee? People stop listening to what you're saying and start hyper-focusing on your weird grammar. It actually becomes an artificial performative distraction. And then I realized an unobvious thing. Modern languages like English or my native language are completely egocentric by design. The syntax is built around an isolated subject. Almost every sentence naturally starts with I and revolves around me or mine. Ancient languages were way cooler about this. Look at Japanese or classical Chinese. In Japanese, for instance, when you want to say I'm hungry, you don't even use the word I. You basically say the stomach wants food. It's objective. The stomach has a problem. You're just reporting the news. In Chinese, you can also express states objectively without an active I driving the action. Those languages were fundamentally less egocentric from the ground up. But when you try to force a non-egoic awareness into an egocentric language, two ridiculous things happen. First, it completely fries your brain. You're standing there spending 90% of your cognitive energy frantically re-engineering basic sentences in your head while trying to talk. Second, it's almost impossible to share personal experience without using first-person pronouns. And earthly experience is always personal. That's the whole point. Compare saying, this body attended university to fulfill a conditioning path designed to secure the approval of its biological progenitors, versus I studied in university to please my parents. One is an absurd mental gymnastics routine. The other is honest human truth. True spiritual integration means learning to live in this body and fully accepting it, not rejecting it. So the approach I've developed for myself is simple. Use it, but don't identify with it. I use the word I because the body, the mind, and the language system are convenient apps for navigating this human experience. I use the pronoun freely, but simply don't mistake the label on the jar for what's actually inside it. Hopefully, this saves some of you from going down that exact same rabbit hole. You don't need to perform enlightenment by tweaking your grammar. Just use the language, order your coffee like a normal person, and stop taking the phantom I so seriously. And speaking of that phantom I, let me tell you how mine completely collapsed. 7 years ago, when I was 32, my life began to slowly unravel. First, I experienced a complete breakdown in the career I had spent nearly a decade building. That apparent failure brought me to a therapist's office, where I realized that most of my life choices had been driven by childhood trauma. Over the next few years, those realizations triggered a total reevaluation of my entire existence, my relationships, my finances, what brings me pleasure, and my identity as a whole. But life didn't grant me the luxury of processing things gradually. It shattered my world all at once. In February 2022, I found myself at the epicenter of a war. Not a metaphorical, but the most conventional, brutal warfare with missiles and tanks. On the night of February 24th, unable to sleep due to COVID or severe flu, whatever it was, I vividly remember the sound of first exploding shells as Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. My life was permanently altered. I share some of the details of what followed in season 3 called The Cost of Being Authentic, so I won't dwell on them now. Let's fast forward to August 2025, exactly 1 year ago. By that time, I had already survived a series of crushing crises, including a physical tumor, bankruptcy, a shattered heart. I had severed all my personal and professional connections, all against the backdrop of an ongoing war. Yet miraculously, I didn't just avoid losing my mind, I managed to alchemize that suffering into an accelerator for self-awareness. I became a completely different person. I dived deep into psychological and spiritual knowledge, launched a YouTube channel sharing ancient wisdom, which resonated so deeply with people that the channel even became monetized. I began experiencing profound states accompanying awakening, such as the movement of Kundalini energy, inner dialogues with the divine, and unity consciousness, which fundamentally rewrites how you perceive reality. During this period, I met someone I genuinely believed was my soulmate, my twin flame, or the one. I was convinced that together we would become a power couple, helping heal the world and bringing essential spiritual truths to light. I distinctly remember looking at him and thinking, "You are a visionary. You are meant to articulate spiritual knowledge in a way no one ever has before." Spoiler alert, he wasn't. Looking back, those were just my own disowned, suppressed parts that I was terrified to claim. That is the classic, both tragic and hilarious mechanics of psychological projection. I couldn't own my potential, so psyche painted it onto someone else instead. I actually break down this exact illusion in detail in the episode on so-called twin flames. But back then, I truly believed my sole purpose in life was to stand in his shadow, hold the flashlight, and support him in his mission. Until it all collapsed. In a moment of my extreme vulnerability, he showed unexpected cruelty and vanished. Later, when he tried to pull me back in, I finally walked away for good. Looking back, he was just a textbook spiritual narcissist wearing linen pants and talking about high vibrations. But back then, I was fully convinced we were cosmic soulmates destined to save the universe together. So when it happened, it felt like my life completely shattered. All at once again. Yet, surprisingly, this didn't trigger a wild emotional storm. I remember writing an entry in my journal, thanking him for the experience and letting him go. I cried for a single day, just one day of continuous tears. And when the tears dried up, I just lay in bed. I was in absolute emptiness. No thoughts, no emotions. By that point, I literally had no material desires left. No craving for money, fame, things, or else. But for a long time, I had lived with the absolute conviction that some spiritual project with that person was my destiny, the sole purpose of my existence. So when that turned out to be an illusion, I discovered myself in a complete void. At some point of me lying in bed, a thought surfaced. Why am I here? There is nothing left for me to do in this world. I want to go back. I want to die. The strangest part wasn't even that there was no emotional drama or despair. It was the quiet, absolute clarity of that thought. I want to die. I had no desire to harm myself. I just lay there staring at the ceiling. No drama, no cinematic crying into a pillow, just pure, calm, existential exhaustion. My mind was literally like, okay, universe, I've tested all the features of this human avatar, and honestly, 1 out of 5 stars would not recommend. Over the next 3 days, 2 things happened. First, an experience I can best describe as dissolving into light. Every time I closed my eyes, even in pitch darkness, a radiant, boundless light appeared behind my eyelids. The sense of me, my name, body, past, emotions, thoughts, everything would immediately dissolve into this light. It wasn't an empty void, it was absolute peace and home. I could still perform basic physical tasks like go to the bathroom, eat, even walk down the street. But every time I opened my eyes, my body felt like a heavy iron weight, and thoughts buzzed exhaustingly in the background. The moment I closed my eyes, the I and all that noise vanished. It felt so peaceful, so true. To return to that state, all I had to do was close my eyes. That was it, nothing more. So I spent most of those 3 days with my eyes closed, because that was the only thing that felt real. The second thing happened as I lay in that absolute silence with that single thought of wanting to depart. A very clear, neutral question appeared. So you don't want to write that book? This question just appeared in the field of awareness. It was completely neutral. No pressure, no judgment, no guilt, no obligation. I knew I was free to choose whether to answer yes or no. In that exact second, I opened my eyes, sat straight up in bed and realized, yes, I want to write that book. Shortly after that choice, the ability to dissolve into the radiant light faded. The blinding radiance softened back into normal perception. Life resumed. The body eats, sleeps, works, thoughts are thought, emotions are felt. Only within there is no more fear, no struggle, no resistance. There is only the timeless knowing of what is, what was, and what will always be. Everything unfolds in perfect order. Only later did I realize what had actually happened. It was a threshold where consciousness could voluntarily depart the body. There was literally a choice to leave or to return. Evidently, leaving unfinished paperwork behind wasn't an option, so the return happened. This experience was essentially a self-inflicted near-death experience. It actually resembles what many NDE survivors describe. For them, the experience is deeply transformative, but they are basically pulled back into physical life because they haven't yet completed the program envisaged by the consciousness for this body. Just as karmic patterns pull the subtle body, often called the soul, back into new bodies after physical death. Vedic texts like Bhagavata Purana, for instance, describe the ability of yogis, the deep spiritual practitioners, to consciously depart the body. The difference for a fully awakened individual is the ability to make a conscious decision, to dissolve into the light or to voluntarily return. Without karmic debts binding them, they choose to return to a body purely out of service, most often to spread knowledge that aids the awakening of others and help them heal. But let me tell you, that experience took a heavy physical toll. The immunity plummeted, as if the body had activated a self-destruction protocol from that initial mental command to die. As if the consciousness made a choice to return, but the physical body didn't get the memo immediately. As if my cells were saying, wait, we're staying, but we already packed our bags. My immunity completely crashed, and it literally took months to physically heal. Yet psychologically it felt like being reborn. Those 3 days were a complete disidentification of consciousness from the human form. And this brings us to the exact reason why I'm sharing the story with you today. Because my experience was extreme, but the underlying mechanism is happening to millions of people right now. just in a slightly different packaging. When we experience a total loss of meaning, when the body feels like a lead weight, when productivity crumbles and the mind simply says, I want to disappear, modern society hands us a very swift diagnosis. You are depressed, you are broken, fix it. We are told to suppress it with medication, force ourselves back into productivity, positive think our way out, or treat our pain as a glitch in the software. But what you may be experiencing is not a clinical glitch. It is a profound, necessary clearing process known across ancient traditions as the dark night of the soul or ego death. Let's clarify it right now. We often call this process ego death, but that term is a bit misleading. The ego doesn't actually die, and frankly, you wouldn't want it to. If your ego died completely, you wouldn't be able to pay your bills, drive a car, or order a coffee. Without an ego, consciousness is just a shapeless field of potential, unable to function in the physical world. The ego is not an enemy to be executed. It's simply an operating system designed for human navigation. Awakening is not about killing the ego, it's about healing it and reversing the hierarchy. In a state of ignorance, the unhealthy ego is the master and consciousness is its hostage. Awakening simply puts the ego back in its rightful place, as a useful servant to awareness. You don't destroy the identity, you just stop letting it drive the vehicle. When we pass through the deeper stages of awakening, our old identity must give away control, which feels like death. The mind panics. From the outside, it looks identical to clinical depression because you lose all interest in your old roles, your job, your social status, and your former desires. However, we need to distinguish between the two mechanisms. Clinical depression keeps you trapped inside the mind, ruminating on past guilt, shame, feeling trapped in a heavy, hopeless ego identity. The dark night of the soul is part of the awakening, is consciousness attempting to break free from the ego identity altogether. It feels terrifying to the mind because the ego structures sense the dissolution of its controlled matrix. So if you're going through a heavy transition right now, please give yourself permission to stop forcing functionality. Let the old software lose its grip on you. Allow yourself to just exist in that void for a moment. Because that nothingness is not a dead end. It's a point of singularity. It's the exact 0 point from which all true creation is born. At some point, you will feel the urge to create again. Trust me on that. And when you do start creating from that space, understand that ego death doesn't mean your old programming vanishes into thin air. As you step forward past the identity you've built, those old defense mechanisms will rise back up. The ego doesn't just quietly surrender, it puts up massive resistance. It's like an ancient, rusty refrigerator in the corner of your mind. It buzzes, it rattles, it turns on every noise machine it has just to distract you and keep you from moving forward. And it gets tricky, because even though I love what I do and deeply enjoy the creative process, when I was editing and preparing this book, the resistance was insane. I literally had to drag myself to the laptop. Websites were freezing, my computer kept crashing, links broke out of nowhere. Now the spiritual ego loves to step in here and play the victim. Oh, it's a sign from the universe, it's dark energy, the demons are blocking me, bad planetary transits are happening, or the cosmos is telling me to stop. But it's not demons, it's not the devil, it's not some external curse. It's just ego programs running their final defense mechanisms against the expansion of consciousness. The ego senses that you're about to publish something that dilutes its power, so psyche projects its resistance onto physical reality. The real secret is that now you see those programs for what they actually are, just automated software. You don't need to perform an exorcism, and you don't need to smash the ancient nosy refrigerator in the corner of your mind just to move forward. You simply notice the noise, recognize its true nature, step past it, and let consciousness express itself through you anyway. Full awakening does not require total psychological perfection. It does not require you to clear every trauma, silence every thought, and fix every flaw before you are quote-unquote ready. That is a common misconception. Awakening is not about eradicating the conditioning. It is about disidentifying from it. You don't have to stop thoughts from arising. You don't have to perfectly heal every single generational program before you are allowed to be happy, peaceful, or abundant. Let your trauma and old conditioning hum in the background like an ancient nosy refrigerator. You don't need to smash the fridge to enjoy your life. Just stop identifying as the milk inside it. So if you feel called to find your location on this map and understand what lies ahead, the book 11 Stages of Awakening, The Spiral Path of Consciousness is available now on Amazon. You can find the direct link in the description and pinned comment below. It will not accelerate your awakening. That process unfolds according to the readiness of your psyche. But by identifying exactly where you are on this spiral, your panicking mind can finally calm down. You realize this darkness is not my end, it is simply stage 6. Deep down, you already know everything written in those pages. This wisdom resides within every human being, waiting to be unlocked. When you read this book or listen to this podcast, you aren't acquiring new information, you are simply remembering. So please take care of your body and remember you are not losing your mind. You are remembering who you truly are. I am simply here to help you remember.